Tov. Today's Daf Yomi is Bava Metzia Daf Samach, Bava Metzia 60, and the Daf Yomi is dedicated for Yeshua, for Am Yisrael, Shemir, for the Chayolim, Matzah, for the Shvuyim. Says the Daf Yomi, Ema Arvin, the last line on Nun Testament base, we start with the Mishnah. We go into the last Daf of this beautiful parah called Hazav. Ema Arvin Peros Beperos, that if a person is coming to sell fruits, and he says, I'm selling fruits from this field for this amount of money, he's not allowed to mix in with it fruits from a different field. People have expectation. Purchaser has an expectation of getting specific fruits. You can't sell him other fruits. I feel chadashim chadashim. Even if they're both new grain, the grain was mostly better when it was aged. So even if he's just switching new grain for other new grain, same quality, he can't do it. And for sure, if you're switching out the new grain instead of the old grain, for sure that's not okay. Be'emes amru. Be'emes means indeed, they say, B'yayin hitiru la'arev kasha berach. Which, when it comes to wine, they allowed you to mix the wine that was strong with the wine that was weak, because the strong wine makes the weak wine better. Ein ma'arvin. So Rashi explains that scenario is that you're allowed to mix the strong wine into the weak wine, because if he said he's going to sell him the weak wine, he's allowed to mix in the strong wine, because it's going to make the weak wine better. The Gemara is going to qualify that case. Ein ma'arvin shimmer yayin b'yayin. Avol nosin lo hashmar. You're not allowed to mix the dregs, the bottom of the barrel of the wine, with other wine, but you're allowed to mix in its dregs. Rashi has to say what that means. Mishin asar mayim b'yeno. Somebody who mixes water into his wine, loyim karenu b'chanus. He's not allowed to sell that diluted wine in the store, elam keno dio, unless he first told him about it and said that he had diluted the wine. Lola Tagar is not allowed to sell it to a merchant, even though he told the merchant that the wine was diluted. Because the merchant could dilute this, the merchant can use it to sell the wine that was diluted. On top of Samach Hamad Aleph in the Mishnah, around 8 lines down. A place where they have the practice to always put water into the wine, then you could do it, because it's common practice to dilute the wine. Atagar nota mehe duranos. The merchant can take from 5 different granaries, and put it into one silo. Meaning to say, the merchants allow, everybody assumes that the merchant's taking the grain from different granaries. He can take it from 5 different wine presses and put it into one cask. As long as his intent is not to deceive people, meaning to say, and that he's telling people, oh yeah, go purchase it from this field, which everybody thinks is the best, but really it's mixed in from another field, and they think it's all from one field. So that's deception. John Rabbanan, so the Brisa says, Ein Tzar Chomer, when we said you can't mix in the 2 grains, the new grain with the old grain, Ein Tzar Chomer Chadashos Me'arva V'Yeshanos Mishalosh. Not only in a case where the new grain is worth 4 and the old grain is worth 3, the Ein Ma'arva, meaning to say 4 is the cheaper price that you can get, or let's say $1, you can get 4 pounds, and for the old grain you can get 3 pounds for $1, because old grain is better. Not only then can you not do it, even if in an unusual situation the new grain is considered to be more expensive than the old grain, and you still can't mix them up, because a person wants to have the ability to age them himself, and so therefore, under those circumstances, you can't switch on him, because he might have preferred the other one. But they allowed you to mix the wine, the strong wine with the weak wine because it makes it better. Amar Rabbi Lazar, Ada Amra. Ada is an unusual word here. So Rashi tells us it means like Hada Amra, which is a very common term. So this means to say, Kol be'emes Amru, anytime it says this phrase, be'emet Amru, or be'emes Amru, it means halacha, it means that's the law. And so this is the law that you're allowed to mix the strong wine with the weak wine. Amar Rabbi Nachman ubein hagito shana. When are you allowed to mix the wines? During the wine press season, because that's the time it's effective. So what about today? That Rashi says that today, nowadays, that we do it and it's not the wine season. How are we able to mix the strong wine with the weak wine? People know everybody's always allowed to waive their rights. He knew about it and he waived his rights. Hamani Rabbi Achai. No, it's Rabbi Acha. Our mission is Rabbi Acha. The time Rabbi Acha. Matir B'davar Nitam. He allows you to mix it if it's something that people usually taste before purchasing. So before people purchase the wine, they could taste it and they could tell, and so therefore they can tell if it's diluted wine or mixed blend. And you're not allowed to mix the dregs of wine. Our Mishnah has this phrase which doesn't make total sense. You're not allowed to mix the dregs of the wine with the wine, but you're allowed to put in its dregs. So clearly this needs to be explained. So you just said in the last clause you're allowed to put in, but in the first clause says you can't mix it in. So what does this mean? What does it mean? He mixes in, you're allowed to put in its dregs. The delay that you let him know. But the next clause says next clause says you're not allowed to sell to the shopkeeper unless you told him when he had not to the merchant, even though you did tell him. So we see that the first clause is allowed even if you didn't tell him. Even if you don't tell him, you could put it in. So what's it talking about? So Amar Rabbi Yehuda, this is what it means. You're not allowed to put in the dregs from yesterday's wine into today's wine. You can't put them from today's into yesterday's. But you could put in its own dregs. You could put in the dregs of the own wine into it. And Tanya Namiyachi Rabbi Yehuda Omer Shofa Yayin Lechavero. If somebody is pouring his wine, Shofa Yayin Lechavero, somebody's pouring his wine for his friend, you can't mix in yesterday's with today's, but you can mix in today's with today's. If somebody's selling the wine, mixes the water with the wine, he can't sell it to a shopkeeper unless he first tells him. Rava brought some wine from the shop, mazgei. He diluted it and mixed it up. They used to mix the wine with the water, and Tame, he tasted it. He didn't like the way it smelled, so Shadre Chanusa, he sent it back. So you're not allowed to give it to the merchant, even though you told him, because the merchant will deceive people with it. So, no, they could tell my mixing. They could tell that it was done. The way I do it, it's very obvious. So maybe the shopkeeper will change the equation by adding more water to it and then sell it. Well, Gemara says Canaan would never sell. Well, if once you're going to start with him adding, he could always add stuff. In a place where there was the practice to add the wine to the water, then you're allowed to do it. The Gemara says, sometimes they added half of the water, sometimes a third, sometimes a quarter. And that was only during the wine press season that they allowed you to do this. Rabbi Yehuda says, the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda says, you're not allowed to market to the kids. You can't give out the kids candy or nuts or parched grain to the little kids, because that's going to convince them to come to your store. The Chachamim Omer Matir, the Chachamim allow you to do it. Well, Yifkos is Ashar, not allowed to intentionally undersell the competition. Chachamim Omer Zochar Latov, say, of course you can. That doesn't doing good. Well, Yibor is Agrisin, you're not allowed to clean out the beans, cleaning out the bad parts of the beans to make the beans look better than they are. That's the position of Abba Shal, Chachamim Matirin. Chachamim allow it. Modim Shal Yibor Me'alpi Magura. And they also admit that you're not allowed to clean off just the top of the silo or the top of the container of the beans. She'enu el gonev ayin. That's just tricking the person. You're not allowed to make the person look good before you make the animal or the utensils or the evet look good before you sell it, because that's tricking them. My time out, Rabbanan. What's the reason why the rabbis allow you to sell nuts and treats to kids to get them to come to your store? Because he says, "Ana mafligna, I'm gozi." He says, because the guy could say, okay, I'll give them nuts, but you can always, nothing's stopping you from doing this marketing campaign as well. You could give them the prunes. Well, you've got Esashar, and you're not allowed to lower the price. My time is Rabbana. What's the reason why the rabbi said you're allowed to undercut the competition? You should come Marveach, because you're lowering the market price. And so therefore, that the people who are watching the fruits will sell it for cheaper when they see other people are doing it. And so therefore, you're just going to lower the price for everyone. You're not allowed to clean out the vegetables. More of these chachamim will allow you to do it. Rabbi Acha, he says if it's something visible, you're allowed to fix it up. What does that mean? You're not only being misharbet the behema. That means they used to make the animal's hair stand up like a scepter, so that it would look healthier and sell for more. They used to blow on the intestines to make them look better. They used to soak the meat in the water. What does it mean? That they would water it with that they would feed the animal this bran water, and that would make his intestines bigger and his hair stand up. Uzi'iri Amar Rav Kahana Zik Mi Miz Kafta. That what they would do is they would basically do some comb. They would comb it like very big comb to make the hair look better. Shmuel Sharal Amirma Tumelis Arboa. Shmuel allowed you to put strings of silk around the garment to make it look better. Rabbi Yehuda Sharal. This is what we just basically call marketing today, but they have to be careful they don't trick people. Rabbi Yehuda Sharal Kusei Karme. Rabbi Yehuda allowed them to wash the colored garments in bran water to make it look better. Rabba Shari Lamedak Tsarari. Rabba allowed them to basically hammer down the canvas garments with like a hammer that was made out of wood in order that the strings looked thinner and better. Rabba Shari Litzalume Gire. Rabba allowed them to paint an arrow on the garments. Rav Papa Bar Shmuel Charlotte Salumi Dikule, he allowed them to paint baskets. So the Gemara says, but why are they able to do this? But then we just say you're not allowed to do it. So the Gemara explains, Kasha, it's not difficult. One is, it depends if it's a new garment and the purchaser knows that you're just doing it to make it look nicer. You're not deceiving him. And then it's allowed. How about tiki? But by an old garment where you're doing it to trick the person into thinking it's new, that you can't do. What's prohibited for a person to do? So the Gemara tells us a story. A story I think is actually very insightful into the nature of slavery in the Talmud. I'm not justifying or excusing it at all. But from this perspective, you see a different, from this story, you see a different perspective on slavery. There was an old slave, and he wanted somebody to buy him because the slave got all his expenses paid. So he went and he dyed his hair and his beard to make himself look younger. Also, Kame de Rava, so came in front of Rava, and we're obviously talking about, Rashi says we're obviously talking about a Canaanite slave, because the Hebrew slave, the concept of Hebrew slavery stopped if the temple was destroyed. So he came to Rava, Amarle Zibnin. He said to Rava, can you purchase me? Rava said, no, I'm not going to. Why? Amarle, you ani and b'nei beisecha. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avos says you need to have poor people in your home, meaning to say, I'm not going to buy a Canaanite slave. I'd rather give my money to hire poor Jewish people to work for me. So then he came to our Papa, the son of Shmuel, and he bought him. One day, Rav Papa said to the slave, Ashki Maya, can you go pour me some water? Now, it's a heavy, labor-intensive activity. You have to carry the water from the lake. You have to fill up the pitcher. It's very heavy. So the slave didn't want to do it. So he went and he whitened his beard. Basically, he showed his true colors, so to speak. He took away his dye and he made himself look old. And now Rav Papa Bar Shmuel wouldn't be able to have his slave do this, because it's not respectful, even though he's a slave, to make him do work that's reserved for the younger people. Amar Lei, so the slave said to Rav Papa Bar Shmuel, Chazi the ana kashisha me'avuch. Look, I'm older than your father, and I can't do this activity. It's not appropriate for you to ask me. Kari Anavshe, Rav Papa said about himself, Tzadik mitzara nechalot v'yavo acher tachtav. A tzaddik will be saved from distress. That's Rava. V'yavo acher tachtav, and I will come after him. And so therefore, Rava was saved, and I got the hard work. The Marsha explains that the slave was saying, you can't make me do this work because it's a mitzvah for you to honor me, because of honoring the elders. And this idea of honoring the elders not only applies to an elderly Jew, but also to an elderly Aramai. And so therefore, you can't use me for this menial labor, like bringing the water. Hadron alach hazav will return to you this beautiful chapter called Chapter of Hazav, and the gold chapter is so beautiful. And now we'll continue, with the next chapter of the Talmud, which is called Ezehu Neshech. Ezehu Neshech is known as one of the more challenging chapters in the entire Shas, but the reason why it's challenging is not because of the first two pages, but because of the later pages. The chapter deals with the prohibition from the Torah of interest. You're not allowed to lend money at interest, and you're not allowed to borrow money at interest. And rabbinically, the rabbis extended this to areas that we wouldn't necessarily assume are interest at first glance, but they might be deceptive ways of avoiding the interest. You're also not allowed to be a witness to interest, as we'll see from our Gemara. So the Mishnah says, Ezehu Neshech ve'ezehu tarbus. There are different prohibitions in the Torah. One is called Neshech, which is a bite. Rashi says that you're biting the person and taking more money from him. And what's tarbus? Tarbus means increasing, that you're increasing the money you make after you lent it. So what are these different prohibitions? Ezehu Neshech. What's Neshech? Neshech is a malva sela, a dinar. A sela is typically a coin that's worth 4 dinarim, and you say, I'm lending you 4, but you have to give me back 5. Or a satayim chitin, or 2 pieces of wheat, b'shalosh, and you have to give me back 3. all this is asar, noshech. This is prohibited because he's biting him. He's taking out more from the borrower. The ezu tarbis, what's considered to be tarbis? Excuse me. Tarbis is hamarba bepeiros ketzad. What's the definition of tarbis, of increasing the fruits? Wakach imanu chitim bedinar zahav akor. So you say, I'm going to take wheat from you, and I have to pay you back. So basically, he bought wheat, and the price that he had agreed upon was 1 dinar, 1 golden dinar for a core. V'chein ashar. And that's exactly what the price was. It was a fixed price for wheat. Everybody knew the price for wheat was 1 dinar per core. Amdu chitin, and so 1 dinar, 1 gold dinar is 25 silver dinar. Okay, you have to remember that. Amdu chitin belamed dinar. But then the price of the wheat went up to 30 dinar. Now, basically, you had taken what happened was you had taken this amount of wheat, a core of wheat, and you said, I'm going to give you 25 silver dinarim in exchange for this wheat. But you didn't have the dinarim at that time, but it was a fixed price. And now it came time to pay him back. But now the wheat, the price changed. It was a fixed price, but now the wheat is worth 30 dinarim. So if you give it back to him, you're in effect giving him interest because he lent you something that was worth 25 and you're giving him back something that was worth 30. Amar lo, and so he says to him, give me back my wheat. He says, give me back my wheat because I want to sell it. And now it's worth 30 and I'm going to buy wine with it. Amar lo, so he says, let me keep the wheat, and instead, I'm now going to owe you 30. That's allowed because since when he bought the wheat, it was a fixed price. We didn't assume that the wheat was going to go up in value. So you're allowed to say, now I'll sell you back the wheat for 30. And instead of me giving you the 30, you could take my wine. You could take 30 dinar of wine. But the point is, he's basically saying, I'm going to give you, instead of me giving you the wheat today on January 1st, I'll give you the wine on February 1st. But the problem is that the wine, there's 2 problems. He doesn't have the wine. There's 2 categories we need. First of all, he either needs to have the wine or the wine needs to be a fixed price. He doesn't have either one. So now he's saying, I'll give you the wine in a month. And the wine could go up in value by then. The wine now is right now worth 30, in a month could be worth 50. So therefore, that would be what's called ribis. And the Gemara is going to explain that is ribis derabanan. That's rabbinic interest, not biblical interest. But first of all, let's go to the Gemara. The Gemara says, midashavik or ribis deraisa. From the fact that the Mishnah starts out with biblical ribis, when it talks about noshech, become a farish derabanan, and then it gives an example with the wheat and the wine, which is rabbinic. We call it the Oraisa de Neshech Vitarbes Chadam Elsahi. So this proves that when, from a biblical perspective, the prohibitions of Neshech and Tarbes are the same thing. Mara says, but how could that be? But the pasuk itself states that the Neshech, the verse itself states that there is neshech kesef, that neshech, this prohibition of neshech refers to money, and the prohibition of ribis refers to food. So it means to say there's 2 separate things. Gemara says, "V'tizbar, are you really in the position the ika neshech below tarbis, that there could really be a case of neshech where you buy it without also increasing? Is that really possible? V'tarbis below neshech, and do you really think there could be a case of tarbis without biting? You really think that's possible?" The Gemara says, actually, it is possible. Neshach below tarbis, echidami. What's the case of neshach without increasing the money, where you bite the borrower but you don't increase the money for the lender? Echidami. Maybe we could have the following situation: either os be meya b'meya. Let's say he lent him 100. Either os be meya b'meya v'esrim. Let's say he says, "I'm going to lend you 100, and you have to give me back 120. 120 is also called a danka. So I'm giving you a meya, and you have to give me back a danka. So it's a different coin. Meikara, but Meikara kaimi meya bedanka. But at first, the meya was worth this danka. At first, the price of the danka was 100. But then Ubasov kaimi meya ve'esr medanka. But in the end, the danka was worth 120. So neshach ika. So you took a bite out of him. That because you're limiting him, because shakol mine midi, because at first he has to pay you back danka, which is worth more than 100, but then in the end, because he's taking something from him that he didn't give him. He gave him and he had to give him back a danka. The tarbas leka, but it's not increased for the lender. Delay slay ravacha, because he's not making any profit. Did danka uspei v'danka kashakel, because he lent him a danka. At the time, it was worth 100, and in the end, he's taking back a danka also, because that's what it was worth when he took it back. So he didn't actually. Well, at the time he lent it to him, the danka was worth 120. By the time he got it back, the danka was worth 100. So he didn't actually make anything. So he took a bite from him, but he didn't actually make anything. So the Gemara says, but ibas or made karazlis hari neshach. It doesn't make any sense. If we follow the original when he gave it to him, that's called a bite, vare tarbis, and it's also an increase for him. The ibas or basof azlis, and if you follow the end case, then lo neshach ika vo tarbis ika. It's not a bite and it's not interest. So the Gemara says, and ibas or sof, and if we would follow the final parts, also, sorry, neshach vari tarbis. Oh, excuse me, did I skip something? And furthermore, the Gemara says, "V'su sarbis bo neshach echidami." How can we have an increase without a bite? Idos if meya b'meya. If you want to say, I'm lending you 100 and you have to give me back 100. Meikar kaimi meya b'danka. At first, the 100 is worth a danko, but sof meya b'chumsha. And in the end, you can get for the Maya, you could get a chumsha of a danka. You could get a fifth of a danka, meaning to say the fifth of a dinar, which is more than a danka. So basically, the same thing, just a mirror image. If you follow the original, it's not neshach or tarbis. So you follow the end, and it's a neshach and a tarbis. So therefore, Rava says, we have no case of where there's neshach without also tarbis. The low chilkan akasev, and not tarbis without neshach. The low chilkan akasev. Why does the Torah give us the two prohibitions? Why does the Torah give us the two prohibitions? El lavor lav b'shnei lavin. Only to cause two prohibitions. What are the two prohibitions? Prohibitions of neshech and tarbis. Two separate prohibitions. Torah wants you to know that if you lend interest, you're in violation of at least two prohibitions. So the Gemara cites the upright. So now, and the Brisa says, let's look at something else. That is the verse. So I might only know that neshach refers to money and ribis refers to food. Neshach ba'ochel minayin. I don't know there's a prohibition of neshach also by food. Remember neshach ochel. The verse says, it says in the verse that it says neshach ochel in the pasuk, and which refers to food. Ribis b'kesef minayin. Tamom or neshach kesef. So it says also neshach kesef. I mean, inyan neshach kesef. If it doesn't relate, if it doesn't relate to neshach kesef, because we already know that there's interest on, there's prohibition on lending money at interest. It already says you're not allowed to take a bite from your brother. Taneo Inyan Uribis. Taneo Inyan Uribis Kesef. So say that there's a prohibition of interest for money. Eliela Belova. Hold on one second. Let me just stop the record here. Hold on.